2025 was a landmark year for reform. After a decade of organizing, New Mexico's wildlife governance reform legislation, we refer to it often as Senate Bill 5, it passed, and we're now deeply involved in its implementation. SB 5 marks New Mexico's first major wildlife governance reform in over a century. The law modernizes the state's wildlife mission to protect all species based on science, changes the department's and the commission's names from Fish and Game or Game to Wildlife. It creates a nominating committee to vet and professionalize a more diverse wildlife commission and increases funding for species most at risk. Together, these changes put New Mexico at the forefront of equitable, science-informed wildlife management and set a model for reform nationwide. But this win is a new beginning, not the end to our reform work. The various elements of this bill will go into effect over the next year or so. So we'll be working diligently to make sure all rolls out effectively by working with the next governor and identifying a diverse, well-qualified pool of candidates for the commission. As a part of that effort, we also worked with the same coalition to secure greater funding for non-game species in New Mexico, the once abundant and now declining species that are overlooked by state agencies focused on game management and overlooked also by federal agencies focused on triage of only the listed threatened and endangered species. These are species like pinyon jays, who are threatened by habitat loss and climate change, but who are essential to the southwestern ecosystems that they call home because they're very effective seed dispersers. Pinyon jays and other species like them are listed on the state's list of species of greatest conservation need. 2025 was the year for revised and updated state wildlife action plans, which list those species of greatest conservation need. In New Mexico, like most states across the country, we greatly increased the number of species listed as needing conservation. Wildlife for All staff have and continue to serve on key planning committees like the current SWAP Corps team, helping ensure the agency delivers on its democratic and ecological promises by funding worthy restoration projects. So as I mentioned before, SB 5 is the start to a new era of wildlife conservation at the state level. To that end, we're also laying the groundwork for future reforms, including model toolkits for other states to replicate New Mexico's success. This year, we made our advocacy toolkit freely available to all and disseminated our State Wildlife Action Plan primer to advocates across the 52 U.S. states, districts, and territories that were revising their wildlife action plans this year. And we're also currently forming a working group to develop model legislation based on SB 5 and the decade of lessons learned in our efforts to get it passed. We'll use that model to inform our support of other state reform efforts.
And it's back to me. All right. Thank you, Michelle. I like following SB 5 because, I think it's the foundation of the state policy landscape. And I also want to talk about how Wildlife for All is punching above our weight class, responding across multiple fronts, offense, defense, and movement building. Because even as we advance state level reform, we are defending hard-won gains from local to federal levels. This year, we coordinated opposition to rollbacks of the Endangered Species Act, Clean Water and Air Acts, NEPA, and protections on public lands, joined countless coalition letters, and are supporting introduction of federal grazing retirement legislation. Put simply, we are fighting on multiple fronts because the stakes demand it. These are not normal times, and we have risen to the occasion as a team to combat federal level harms and protect the wildlife we all cherish. In total, we've engaged in significant policy efforts in 8 states, from Nevada and Arizona to Maine and Florida, while countering harmful proposals in many others. A few highlights include our coalition's petition to end mountain lion trapping in Nevada, support for Arizona's anti-hounding petition, and with B. Friedlander, who's on this call, our work exposing and halting the Michigan goose gassing proposal. We also worked with in-state advocates to be the first to break the news on Florida's declining subpopulation of bears in the Osceola region while the state advances its first, and I will say misguided, black bear hunt in 10 years. We're working across these many fronts because protecting wildlife isn't about just one state winning or losing. Capture spreads, but importantly, so does resistance. So, I want to take a very real moment to connect our work to the democratic pressures playing out across the country, pressures that directly affect wildlife commissioners and the public systems meant to protect us all. Over the past year, we've seen coordinated campaigns designed to intimidate public servants who are simply trying to make decisions rooted in science, public accountability, and ecosystem health. So in Colorado, Wildlife for All stood with the commissioners who were targeted by trophy hunting groups in a lawsuit just because these commissioners stood up for science and ethical management. These commissioners endured harassment, smear campaigns, and political pressure simply for signing on to an op-ed that called for an end to mountain lion trophy hunting. We mobilized supporters, elevated the facts, and backed them as they upheld what wildlife and democracy require: transparent, principled defensive values. This is what courage looks like, and we were really proud to stand with them. And in Washington, we faced a new chapter of the same playbook. A public records request pulled nearly 90 emails from our coalition's listserv, routine public interest advocacy that really had nothing improper in them. We reviewed every document in detail, but groups like the Sportsman Alliance and Washington Conservation Coalition tried to use these disclosures to manufacture scandal. In fact, Sportsman Alliance is still using this process to target our coalition partner, Washington Wildlife First, and to revive a campaign that they've been trying to push, removing commissioners from office who, frankly, just stand up for wildlife. But I want to be really clear. This wasn't an expose. It's a harassment campaign dressed up as some sort of accountability. And I think honestly, this is why Wildlife for All does the work that we do. Because when public systems are vulnerable to intimidation, when commissioners are threatened for prioritizing biodiversity, and when transparent advocacy is distorted into conspiracy theories, that's not just a wildlife problem. That's a democracy problem. Wildlife for All was built for moments like these. We're not here to appease bad faith actors. We're here to strengthen the systems that belong to all of us and to protect the people that serve in them. So we're not going to back down from defending commissioners, partners, or everyday people working to fix broken governance structures. And we will certainly not let anti-democracy groups like these define the narrative about what we do, why we do it, or whom we serve. To that end, our national coalition now includes about 230 advocates, with an average of 40 people participating regularly in monthly calls. These gatherings have become spaces for learning, strategy, and solidarity across state lines. And our coalition isn't just a network, it's a forecasting system. If something harmful is introduced in one state, we hear about it almost instantly and we strategize together on how to push back. We've continued also strengthening ties with environmental justice and biodiversity allies nationwide, building the connective tissue of a broader democracy and wildlife movement. So I mentioned courage earlier. When state governance is captured by extractive interests, it signals that science and public trust can be ignored and that that capture can travel upwards. So state level extraction fuels federal level collapse. When leaders refuse to answer basic questions about how wildlife is governed, that's not a minor oversight, it's a democratic warning sign. And that's why we launched our Courage campaign this summer, which calls on all of us to hold governors, legislators, and appointees accountable. Every time we shine a light on who's making the decisions and whose interests they serve, we reclaim power. So, courage means refusing to accept secrecy, corruption, or business as usual destruction, frankly, whether it's happening in a state house or a federal agency office. And so far, our community has sent 970 letters through our Courage page, and that number grows every week. Most of the advocates who have reported on results of their outreach reveal vague or non-committal responses from both Democratic and Republican decision makers. So, we're currently exploring strategies for our next actions to hold leaders accountable. We also continued shifting the narrative this year. So, through our Theory of Change workshop and video, town halls like this one, and participation in 3 major conferences, we've elevated the link between democracy and wildlife reform. Following a months-long staff-wide Theory of Change process, including intensive workshops, the creation of a 4-minute video, a strategic 30-year roadmap, a visual diagram, and the launch of several cross-team committees, who I might add have already generated 2 white papers, we now have a clear and coherent framework that anchors all of our work. And part of shifting the narrative means challenging the ones that harm wildlife, communities, and democracy, and replacing them with stories rooted in truth, justice, and ecological reality. So this year, as an example, we confronted several dangerous narratives head on. First, we pushed back against weaponized science. When UC Davis released a misleading, industry aligned paper, we called it out for what it was, an anti wolf political agenda dressed up as research. Our petition, signed by hundreds of people demanding accountability, helped spark national coverage and gave advocates a clear, evidence based explanation they could use. We're not afraid to question bad science, especially when it's used to justify cruelty or ecological harm. We also produced new narrative guides for carnivore protection, helping advocates counter decade old talking points like the myths that predators destroy ecosystems, or that coexistence is impossible, or that killing is the only management tool. Our work outlines what the current system gets wrong, like the idea that single species game plans magically benefit biodiversity. We're showing the public how a narrow, extractive use centered model leaves most species and ecosystems unprotected. And we've been raising alarms about a different kind of narrative, one that directly connects to democracy. This year, we helped expose one of the most alarming stories in the country, the rapid militarization of public lands along the southern border. Under the still active Trump Directive NSPM 4, the US military took control of more than 100,000 acres in Texas and New Mexico without public or tribal consent. These so called national defense areas authorize the Army to detain civilians, including US citizens, for trespassing. But the real trespass is on Indigenous sovereignty and biodiversity. These zones carve through Indigenous lands, echoing the same disregard for sovereignty and ecological connection that we are seeing with the border wall.
Anymore.
So, a Christian Science Monitor investigation that we were featured in revealed the truth. There's secret land transfers, there's chaos in local government, and a creeping rise in authoritarian power, all while in the same location. Illegal crossings are at a 25-year low. Endangered species like jaguars and Mexican gray wolves are losing habitat, and local communities and indigenous nations are being silenced. We've been helping people understand this isn't just a border issue. This is a democracy issue, a land justice issue, and a wildlife issue, because the same forces stripping ecological protections are the ones eroding democratic rights. So, through social media explainers, media outreach, and collaboration with partners, we're reframing the story so people can see the bigger picture and act on it. Why are we talking so much about narrative? Well, narrative isn't a side project or a buzzword. It's a vital strategy because when we change the story, we change what's politically possible. Case in point, like Michelle shared with you, our SB5 storytelling campaign helped show what reform looks like in practice, giving other states a roadmap. We've grown our communications reach with new professionally shot and produced videos, website expansions, social media reels, and other digital campaigns that make this complex work accessible and hopefully inspiring to folks. Because in a captured system, narrative is often the first battleground, and winning it can open doors that were previously shut. We are also not stopping at shaping the story. We are soon going to be launching Building Power for Wildlife Justice, our new organizing training program, which will teach advocates nationwide how to understand the systemic challenges facing wildlife, communicate about them clearly, organize campaigns that turn narrative into action, and equip people with the skills and tools to amplify our shared vision for democratic, ethical, and science-informed wildlife management. Gladys is actually going to share more about this shortly. Finally, I am pleased to share this year that our social media presence has grown at a meteoric pace, amplifying our work and connecting thousands more people to wildlife and democracy. On Facebook, we've grown to more than 23,000 followers, a 3,400% increase, reaching 1.1 million people on the platform over the past 11 months and generating more than 375,000 interactions across posts, which is an increase of 2,800% over last year. And on Instagram, we are almost to 14,000 followers, a 1,600% increase, reaching nearly 3 million people and sparking more than 436,000 interactions, which is an increase of 4,400% over last year. This is important because every like, every share, every comment represents a person engaged, a community strengthened, a louder collective voice for wildlife and ethical governance. Our message is spreading faster than ever, and people are acting on it.
Absolutely. Thanks, Mandy. So, a couple other notes on organizational resilience. I'd be remiss not to mention some of these internal improvements that we've made. It's not always the most exciting update, but we want you to know that we work hard to be the most responsible fiscal stewards of our donors' hard-earned dollars. On the operations side, we're still a very scrappy team, punching above our weight class, and have grown stronger, smarter, and more resilient. We welcome Gladys to our team this year, adding much needed expertise in grassroots organizing and programmatic capacity. We've expanded our volunteer base to 6 active contributors who are really critical to operations, from website development to accurate accounting. And we streamline operations to focus resources where they matter most. Our foundation funding has doubled in the past couple years, and individual donor revenue rose by 76%. We also earned a platinum candid rating for transparency and accountability, up from the gold rating that we've had last year. Every dollar we save and every new supporter we welcome helps us do the real work of defending democracy for all life.